There's a lot of cannabis use going on in the reality right now. And as you can see, the government is beginning to endorse it. And on all of the major outlets, you see it on CNN. And so we always have known that anytime the governments begin to endorse something, maybe we need to take a closer look at it and to see whether it's in our favor or not in our favor. And today I'm not actually here to tell you what you should and should not be doing. I'm here to just lend a couple suggestions so that you can understand, or as I say, understand things better, so that way you can get through your experience as smooth as possible. So the cannabis theory begins with understanding exactly what the plant is and what it actually causes within the body and within your structure and your consciousness. What allows cannabis to make people more creative? Because there's a numerous amount of people, almost countless, that have invented things like music and logos and even grand theories and lots of those kind of what I would say innovative approaches and inventions into the reality with the use of cannabis. And so when we look under the fibers of it, literally, what we find is that cannabis is actually a female plant. That the plant that people smoke is the female. The male, obviously, is hemp. And this female's process is actually a process of yearning, meaning that the cannabis plant actually is yearning to pollinate or yearning to actually populate and create with the male plant, which is actually absent. Any person who's ever grown weed knows that the first thing you do is never allow any male plants to be around the female plants. So what happens is that if you can see this plant on an energetic level, what you would actually see is the divine feminine itself. And that's why I think it's always been given names that are synonymous with the ocean, synonymous with the female, Mary, and Mar, Ma, and all of those acronyms. And this is very important for us to realize, because that means that for those who choose to utilize cannabis, it means that they're filling their body with the divine feminine. And this is often why cannabis is often used to sort of patch the hole in people's reality of where they're not getting that divine feminine energy. Cannabis can become somewhat of a panacea or cure-all for people's situations and things that they're dealing with in life. If they're experiencing anxiety, they may smoke cannabis. If they're bored, they may smoke cannabis. If they feel uncreative and dull, they may smoke cannabis. And so what happens is the reason why this plant has become so popular in use is because the reality itself in our interactions with the organic feminine forces has been at an all-time low. And the one thing I'll say is that this is not a male and a female thing. I want you to understand that the divine feminine goes much more further than just the human female. As we've talked about, it's even the cat has a female. Even we see plants have a female. We see frogs, there's females. So it's what's behind those eyes, the force that's behind those eyes that we're talking about, that fills up every single body, whether you're quote unquote a male human or a female human. So at any point where we lack that divine feminine force, whether it's the love from our mother or our grandmother, whether it's the love from a significant other, and what we even see in a moment is whether it's the lack of creativity at any aspect, whether that's having a child or having what we would say is a project that you're passionate about. When you lack that, you may seek to fill that hole with something like cannabis. Now, this goes into something bigger. It's called the cannabis theory because it could be applied to anything that incorporates the divine feminine and the divine masculine force. So you can see how these days you have this excessive use of this substance that's filling people's body with this creative force, i.e. dark matter. Because the dark matter is the womb. It cultivates. It creates. Okay? And so it's the exact same force that we use to create. So what happens if we get filled with this force, but we're not creative? This means that we've gotten full of something, but there's no outlet. So what you see in the industry now which is why they're encouraging the use of cannabis use, is that you see that the animalistic instinct, which is the root to our creation. It is the foreground, if you may. It's the soil that we grow from. It's also what we will progress back to in the event that we don't fully utilize our human ability. So this is why excessive cannabis use also leads to a person being much more sexual and wanting to populate with someone else. And it leads to, like, the music you see today. It's basically, as one song, even they just put it in the title, it's just marijuana and women. And again, because this is not partial to a male or female, it could be for the female, just marijuana and men. So how do you balance out this type of energy? Well, it's very simple. What we'll find is that within every human being, there is the ability that we've been endowed with, which is to be more creative than just people who reproduce. You know, as the first command is reproduce or be fruitful and multiply. But as human beings with this great mind and consciousness that we now have this ability to invent. We can paint. We can play music. We can print things. You know, there's 3D printing. There's many different things that we can begin to engage in that actually are other expressions of our creative force. But if you lack that outlet, what can happen is you will become bottled up. You will yearn for something. Notice how if someone says to you, well, what is your passion? That can relate to your significant other. Well, you know, I'm passionately in love with her, or I'm passionately in love with him. Or it could relate to your craft. You could paint. He's a passionate painter. She's a passionate designer. So be on watch for this. And like I said, it's not just cannabis. It's just the cannabis theory. It gives us a good stamp to put on it, so that way we recognize it in other aspects. Because we can find that we will begin to abuse certain things or overuse certain things. We can even do that with each other. You could make a person your cannabis. Every time you feel anxiety, you call them. Every time you're hurt, you call them. Every time you're bored, you call them. But what's really being desired is that you tap into that creative force and begin to create something within. So that way you become addicted to self. So the last thing that I really want to talk about here is I want to talk about, it's somewhat of a do's and don'ts list, but you know, you would be almost insane to try to obey all of these principles, but it gives you a greater insight as to how things are actually, it gives you a greater insight of how things are put together. So let me just go ahead and start. So in this sense, it's kind of the conclusion of the cannabis theory, but it's basically about what happens when you get into states where you open up your chakras. So we won't make it specific to, substances, because meditation can do that. Breathing can do that. And it's important for you to realize in a certain tense what exactly goes on in your consciousness and even in your physical body when you engage in techniques that actually open the chakras. So obviously we have to put this into some kind of perspective. So we'll say in relation to cannabis, some of the do's and don'ts. And then again, you can apply this to anything that you're utilizing or whatever you have going on, because it'll help you make sure that you keep your system filtered properly. Because remember, it's your responsibility to be your own customs. You have to set up customs at your own ports. Your ports are your chakra centers. Those are actually the processing centers for your consciousness. That's why food goes through different organs to be processed. Vitamins, nutrients, minerals go through different organs to be processed. That's why you can ensure that when you leave here, there will be a process that ensues that attempts to filter you. And that's what we talked about, the reincarnation process, in order for you to be refined. Okay. And then hypersentience, because this is still part of a machination in a certain sense. It's a process, the reincarnation process. Hypersentience brings you to a point to where you can actually transcend that whole process. This is almost like not eating. So there's no reason for organs to be used to process anything if you're not eating anything. So those are the reference points for hypersentience. Just so this starts to make sense. It's like, well, wait a minute. If these are, some people can get confused. They're like, well, if this is the organs are the archons, and archons are, they can get all nuts about it. But realistically, if you look at it in its traditional sense and you see both sides of it, you see that there is a positive and a negative and a neutral behind every planet, behind every organ, et cetera, et cetera. So this is about how to get those formulas correct. So what happens is when you blow open your chakras, however you're doing that, if it just so happens that you're actually in front of an electronic device, what happens is, especially with screens, larger screens, they do throw out a great deal of frequencies. And those frequencies are coming across a certain band. Okay? And we discovered this even with working with scalar technology. And scalar technology was somewhat of a technological method of trying to heal the body. I only found that it was useful in charging electronics, like charging them to a level to where they actually seem to resonate. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but scalar technology was an invention. It's been used for different things, generally in, more of like laboratories and those kind of things. But I came across a scalar device, and what it used was screens, like your big computer screen at home, and it flashed these symbols that drip down the screen, somewhat like the matrix code. And those symbols, because of their colors and their shapes, threw out frequencies into the room. Okay? So this is how you can connect it to science, if you may, or things that are applicably used in advanced technology today. So your screen at, 5,000 pixels, 1,024 pixels, whatever, has all these frequencies coming off of it. So what happens is if you open your chakras, then you're also going to be exposed to those frequencies, and those frequencies work in a specific band. So this is something to be concerned about. It may be a good idea that if you're going to blow open your chakras, however you do it, to remove yourself from electronic devices that emit a large amount of electronic frequencies. The next thing is it's an all-time favorite for people to blow open their chakras, and I'm just using it as this type of term. This could be using substances like cannabis, etc., and then go play video games. And while it may add and heighten the experience of the game, you may want to use discretion. Now, I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm saying use discretion of how many times you at least do it, because what you're also doing is while that chakra is open, not only are you getting that frequency, but you're also getting the embed. And we actually discovered this through the process of reference points with chakra opening substances. Reference points are, let's say, for instance, some people are concerned about when is cannabis use harmful. And it actually becomes harmful when you have these crummy reference points. This means that every time you utilize it, you basically lay back on the couch, you do nothing, or, you go and do something that's virtually meaningless. Versus if you utilize it and you go and let's say you're painting, let's say you go into drawing, et cetera, what happens is that it sets these reference points in your consciousness. And the reason why is that when you utilize chakra altering substances, you create a spike. And that spike and that open of the frequency creates a reference point. And so every time that you utilize it, you go back to that reference point. So if you create too many of these crazy reference points, then you kind of permanently embed your mind with these kind of reference points. So that's what you need to be concerned about. The second thing is arguments. Like sometimes we feel like when we get out of one of those crazy quarrels, the best thing to do is go and utilize one of these substances. But the unfortunate part is that it only intensifies the thought process, the actual signature in your mind that's causing you to remember what went on. It may dull your consciousness, or it may dull your feelings because of the dopamine generally that's being released in the brain, but it does intensify the overall process of how much you're thinking about whatever occurred on a subconscious level. And when you do that, you're basically overexposing yourself to a negative frequency. So be concerned about that. Noisy environments, especially environments that are full of a lot of inorganic noises. And this is because the senses being heightened are somewhat like Superman being dropped into the world at first, not knowing how to control those those centers, those senses, and just being overwhelmed. So you want to be aware of that. You want to not put yourself into very noisy environments. Same thing with heavy workouts. This is another thing. When you put your body under stress, physical stress, and then your chakras are open, it leaves that reference point. Be aware of that. TV, movies, especially if it's not heightening your consciousness, being aware of that. Same thing, frequencies flying everywhere. Here you go. Anything over electronics generally. You want to be concerned about that. Now watch, if you take this checklist, because you can write it down when you hear the archive of the show. You take this checklist, you'll start noticing that if you choose to utilize substances that blow open the chakras, you'll see that in most cases, you're doing some of this. And this is what actually creates the issue. It's not so much the substance itself, because it could be a medicine in every tense, but it's actually the improper use. Just like you don't use certain medicines in ways that, you don't go and put it in your ear. So there could be improper use more so than the substance itself being the culprit to, what's causing or giving you some kind of demise or negative experience. The next thing is also meeting with strangers while you're engaging, and it's a major thing because your chakras are open and they're so open. If you're with a stranger and you're engaging with this substance with them, you don't know where their energy is coming from and what's going on with them. You leave yourself susceptible in another realm. Like if you have an active third eye, you can see this rather easy, but for those who don't and haven't blown open those chakras, they won't know what's going on, but you're actually interfacing with the person. So if it's someone that you don't know, you can make yourself become exposed to things that you later on manifest as something that you don't even know where it came from. Driving, and it's because you're not actually giving the substance the respect that it really deserves. It needs to be put into a space to where you can actually focus on what you're doing, so that way you can take it through its complete process. But if you're driving, trying to change gears, you're trying to not hit the car in front of you, and the red light and the dude in the traffic, the person honking the horn. So this is leaving reference points of chaos once more. Cell phones, man, cell phones is almost like top of the list, but that's also what a lot of people do the most because they know they get in their chakra opening substance, and then they start flipping through the phone, and then there they are with this device in their hand, which is where one of the major chakra points are. Palm of the hand, in the center of the bottom of the feet, known as the sole of the foot also. Those are major vortices there. So that's just sucking in all of that. Because you can't imagine that the energy that's coming off of a phone, if you put it on your chest, if you put it on your genitals, whatever, that it's not going to damage you because it's got radiation coming off of it. So if you're putting that on you when you also have your chakras open, you can, it's a no-brainer. But sometimes, you just have to go through this stuff in order to understand what's really happening and why you may not be able to have that breakthrough that you're looking for, especially with your creativity and utilizing the divine feminine properly. The next thing is avoiding acidity. Like, a chicken, fried chicken or whatever, right on top of it. Sometimes you get the munchies, you go eat the sugar, all these kind of different things. When you take the pH of the body and you shift it into an acidic form, that's actually what allows it to get on the band of what most people don't want to experience. This is the energies that are associated with sickness, whether it's mental sickness, physical sickness, etc. It's because of the acidic level of the body. We all know that's those of us that study the body, but this also affects us differently when we're utilizing in conjunction with the chakras. In addition, avoiding the hive. And what the hive is basically the inorganic illusionary structure, sometimes created by electronics, sometimes created by the Wi-Fi, avoiding the hive as much as possible. And like I said, on all this stuff on the list, these are just things that if you can check off more of these when you're engaging, the more, the better. But again, don't get crazy about it because this stuff can become your worst enemy if you start getting crazy about it. But remember, avoiding the hive is a good idea. You may want to go out into nature. If you can get off the grid, turn it into a ceremony and then really start inheriting what it has to really give to you. The next thing is avoiding negative thoughts. We talked about that early, arguments. But if you notice, sometimes the mind, some call that paranoia, it manifests in a different kind of way. It will attempt to start feeding in these negative thoughts into your consciousness. And these just kind of come out of nowhere. It's like, just random negative thought. You want to make sure that you're in control of your consciousness to not allow it to drift into negative thoughts when you're utilizing your chakra opening substance. The next thing is avoiding electrically generated music. Now, the interesting part is many of us played instruments, especially when we were younger. So it may be a good idea to decide to go and jump on Amazon and find an instrument that you like to play. Like even on our site, we have some solfeggio flutes that, a kid can play, and they sound wonderful. You sound like you're a professional playing these things. So it's a good idea to go, and we're going to talk about solutions here in a moment, but it's a good idea to find some naturally generated sound. Go get a trombone, go get a trumpet. If you play clarinet, if you play violin, if you don't, learn to, because these organically generated sounds from elements will work wonders for you as far as a frequency level and actually allowing you to not just tune your body, but get in tune with your body. That's why some people can actually play by ear, because they're so in tune with natural frequency that they can really understand where that frequency scale is. And when you can do that, you can also in these experiences begin to govern the frequency of your body and change it and morph it, especially for some of the substances that really open the chakras much more in an advanced way, such as ayahuasca and geohuasca and diamond tree, etc. The next thing is also remember that you can actually balance back out your acidity with, on our site, we have a product called the Alkalizer. And if you don't have something like that, then you can also use baking soda and, just a teaspoon or something. But if you know that you've just engaged in a lot of acid, then you can actually restore your pH by going ahead and getting back on the alkaline level. So just remember, you can actually govern the alkaline and the acidic levels of your body with certain substances, bicarbonates, etc. Some of the do's. Lovemaking. I mean, everyone likes that. It's naturally organic, and it actually allows you to generate a very strong pranic force, and it kind of keeps you away from the electronics and gets you into something that's different than that. And, there's never anything wrong with something like that unless there's some kind of abuse going on there. And, use your own discretion. Meditation. Another great level of setting a reference point for yourself that allows you to return to that reference point every time you choose to engage. And then it becomes somewhat of a habit to where you're always utilizing that reference point. Yoga. It is a little bit intense on the body, but it's a positive level of intense. It's kind of different than working out, like lifting weights and that kind of thing. The yoga often puts you in positions to mature those chakra centers. So nature obviously is a great idea because you're able to inherit the grounding of the earth and also begin to notice the connection between you and the earth, the geometry, etc. Family. I mean, family is that those aren't strangers. Those are people that you can spend time with, that you can get love with. Obviously, you don't want to start getting into some kind of conflicts or quarrels, but find those right times and spaces to engage with your family. And it's not a bad idea to be more heightened in those scenarios so that you can connect more with them. Inventing. This is one of my favorite ones. It's like grabbing a pen and paper, go manual. That's what I call it. Go manual. And, after you've engaged, and start sketching and start drawing and start writing about your experience. That's one of the number one ways to increase your overall productivity and use of the divine feminine. Again, I mentioned writing, drawing for those who know how to draw and go beyond fancy stickmen, and also person-to-person talking when it's time to connect with that special person in your life, or even with your mother, your child. It's not a bad idea if this is a person that you're familiar with, to, if you're utilizing that, to go and have that conversation with them that will allow you to connect with them more.